Hey folks, welcome to Metal Mill 52 Workshop. My name is Bill. We're working on an LBSC TICH, and in this week's episode you'll see me manufacturing a lot of the stuff that has to do with the brake system, going on from making all the stuff for the shaft and the actuating arm here, or brake stand as it's called in the book. So please follow along. Let me know what you think. Hope you enjoy this week's episode. And if you have any questions, please ask. I'll do my best to answer. Please give me a thumbs up. Let me know what you think about it. Thanks. Hey folks, just finished machining the brake shaft. It's simply a piece of 1/4 inch steel, and you turn the ends, you turn them, face them, and turn them down to, from a 1/4 inch down to 3/16 for a 5/16 inch dimension. And this is, what's cool about this is the piece that the ends will get, or the arms, the lever arms will get silver soldered or brazed to. I'll be using silver solder since that's what I'm familiar with. So I do need to clean this up, and I'll put it back in and just use the file and clean off the surfaces there so that it'll accept the silver solder better. Well, I took the 5C collet chuck off and then put the 3-jaw on because the size of this is some 5/8 inch bronze that I ordered. I don't know who I got this from, McMaster-Carr probably, and it's awesome stuff. And I ordered this bar. I used a bunch of it for making bearings for my big locomotive, my Allen Mogul. I haven't used it in a while, and I have this huge chunk left, but it's a little bit bigger than 5/8 of an inch, so I can't use a 5/8 inch 5C collet for it. So I'm going to use this in the three-jaw chuck for the bearings for the brake shaft. And thanks again to my buddy Russ for making these cool chuck trays. Sure makes changing the chucks easy. I'll shoot a little, making one cut on the bronze bushing. I switched over to carbide, and I'm taking like 20 thou. That's all. 10 thou depth of cut. I could cut it a lot deeper than that, but there's no rush, and I like to kind of creep up on the final dimensions. So I'll just be quiet and show you one pass using the auto feed. Okay, here's the first bushing, almost complete. I just used the number 12 drill that's called for in the plans, and that's a neat trick. This is a really good fit on the little brake axle, brake bar, whatever you want to call it, actuating bar. So it's a real nice fit. Really happy about that. So this is drilled all the way. I went ahead and did like 1/2 inch deep. So I just need to cut this off the shoulder at 3/32, then drill a couple of holes and file this to a round shape or an oval shape. Okay, here we are with the brake bar and the 2 bearings, the bronze bearings. Just done some test fitting and trimming a little bit off the inside of the bearings, and I think I have a really nice fit here. Let me do an aerial shot. You can see if I put tension on the brake system, you can see that little center. This will be where the drop arm is, right where my thumb is. So that'll be silver soldered to this bar here. That's an 1/8 inch bar, and then there'll be the actuating nut and a couple of arms that are also at a 90-degree angle silver soldered, and they'll be actuated by a screw that comes out of a column that is affixed to the rear bumper. And here's a setup for machining, putting the holes and so forth in the little bearings. What I did, I used a 5C collet in a collet block in the vise in the mill, and I used the little beam in the drill, and it was easy to line up, make sure I was centered. Then I could set my DRO at 0, 0, and then offset 1/4 inch either way from center. And as you can see, I used an end mill and made a little flat spot so I could keep the little round arced shape of the part, and then a center drill and a number 49 drill here which is tapping size for 256. So later I'll have to come back and enlarge these holes, but I wanted it this way so I could use it as a tap guide or a guide for the drill. I'll show my setup for making these bearings oval. The first thing I did was to mark the amount that needed to be removed so it would clear the chassis and wouldn't be overlapping. And I've cut this side off. My shadow's in the way. But cut one side off, about halfway through cutting the other side off, just using my little coping saw with a fresh blade in it. Just a nice peaceful way to do it. And so after I get the major work done, then my plan is just to file a little bit on the four corners, just bring it a little bit to the oval shape. All right, this was a fun afternoon of machining. I've just installed the bearings, bronze bearings, and the rod here, the actuating rod. Side profile view, you can see how that will be perfect with the little arm that's soldered to that bar. When that bar rotates, it'll apply the brakes. So let me flip it around, I can show you the other side too. There we go, that one's a little bit prettier of an oval. I'm not the world's greatest oval filer, but I use the little 256 screws here. These are Phillips head, they look okay, and I really like the size of the 256. Seems to be a really good size for this locomotive. For a lot of these smaller parts. Next thing to do is to fabricate the drop arm and the two little arms that fit on the brake shaft and hold the nut. So the drop arm is a piece of 1/8 inch steel. I've laid this out and already drilled the hole. I used a letter D hole here, and then I think what was it, number 43 as a clearance size for the 256. Hoping that the letter D will give me a snug fit on the brake shaft so it'll stay in place so that for silver soldering. And I just laid out a little design here. I'll cut this and grind it to a nice shape in a little bit. The other arms are made out of 1/16 inch steel. So I actually had some steel left over from my 16 gauge. It was left over from my test bending from when I made the tender for my locomotive, my big locomotive years ago. And so I decided to make use of that. I just cut off a couple little slivers. They're a little bit more than 3/8 of an inch wide. And I've laid out one of them, as you can see here. It's going to be pretty similar, a letter D size hole at the top, and then an elongated portion here, just like in the drawing, for a 3/32 inch slot for the nut. And my plan is, instead of having to machine two of them, I've ground them to about the same size and laid out one. So I'm going to put crazy glue on this, crazy glue it together, and then I can machine them, drill and machine it all at once. Okay, here's the actuating arms that I made last night. I just pointed this out because although this may have worked, the hole was a little bit loose. As you can see, the drill kind of got dislodged when it hit my soft jaws there, and my 3/32 inch slot came out kind of erratic there. So I decided to remake them, and a critical piece was I went ahead and made these a little oversized. I made the blanks 400 thou wide and then about 2 1/4 inches long, because that way there's plenty of extra room, as you can see, for me to trim them down, grind them. And I was a little bit more careful in milling the slot, the 3/32 inch slot there. So it's the same 1/16 inch steel, but it's a much nicer fit on the brake shaft itself, which I actually inadvertently made this thing a little bit undersized by sanding it clean when I had it in the lathe. So that was part of the problem. So address that with an undersized drill here, and a letter D drill actually, so it's a few thou under 1/4 inch. So I just need to mark these things out now with that little shape and then grind them to shape, and I can continue on. Alright, for making the brake nut, I decided to try to make one out of bronze. So I took my oversized bronze bar, turned it down to a 1/2 inch diameter so I could use my 5C collet chuck, and I just turned the 3/32 inch stub on the end, and you can see it's a nice fit on there now, and it'll move smoothly on these arms. So next I'm going to put this in a block and mill it down to a 1/4 inch square, and then I can reverse it and do the other side, turn the stub on it. I'll bring you back for those sections as well. Okay, well, it's made some good progress here in a very short period of time. I got the bronze block milled square, and I centered it and have drilled and tapped my number 5 by 40 thread per inch hole here in the center. I'm using some tap paste, and it's going real well. So the next thing I just need to remember, when I put this back in the lathe with this part in the 1/4 inch square 5C collet chuck, I need to remember to leave enough material there for the other little tab. So I have to be real careful. I don't want to ruin all this work. And it's a little cold out, that's why I'm using the gloves. Good old Harbor Freight, they finally have a box of gloves back in stock with the coupon for $7.99, so I went ahead and bought some. Okay, I finished all the parts, the little parts for the brake rod, brake shaft, and the drop arm and so forth. And I was getting ready to silver solder them on, and I thought, before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and make the little brake stand, and I wanted to point something out. The main reason I want to make it is so that I can locate it, and then I can double check and make sure the arms are in the exact right spot before I silver solder them on. I knurled the shaft so that they'll stay where I put them, so that's a nice comfort to know that that's there. And I do have a hunk of 1/2 inch hexagonal brass left over. It takes a 2.5 inch long piece. I'm about to cut that off and put it in the lathe and start on it. But I did want to point out, this is what I'm talking about. I'll make next the brake column and spindle. I'll make that. Here's the spindle, here's the brake column, because that screws into the rear bumper. You need to make sure it's in the right spot before you solder the arms in place. So one thing I wanted to point out is this view. I realized this is a top view, so the arm, the brake thing, will actually be on the left side in the top view, and it's more clear here. So whereas I was looking at it in my mind, I was thinking left side, but with the thing upside down, so that would put the hole in the wrong spot. Not a huge deal, but it wouldn't be correct, and you never know what that would interfere with later. So I'll need to make, while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to make a note that where the hole needs to go. And my point in making the brake stand now and having the column and all that, I can have that lined up and have the shaft sticking through it, and then make sure I've got the nut and the arms in exactly the right place before I silver solder. Here's the first couple of cuts of turning the hex bar into a smooth 1/4 inch shaft on the bottom so that I can thread it 1/4 by 40. Using a carbide a carbide tool here. It's going very smoothly. I like working brass, it's really nice. Okay, here's the part about halfway through machining. As you can see, I've turned the bottom half inch to a 1/4 inch diameter, threaded it with a tailstock die holder, and drilled about halfway through with a number 30 drill. So I'm about to put it in the 5C tool holder this way. I'll face it off to the exact right dimension. It's about 30 thou too long. Drill it, center drill it all the way through, so I've got a nice center passageway, and I can turn the outside of it down to a 1/4 inch. The rest of it I'll have to do, what I think I'm doing, I think I'll use a 1/4 inch 5C collet here, and then I'll be able to use the rotating tailstock to turn the taper in, but I'll show you how that works. Okay, I got all set up to use the rotating tailstock holder, and really haven't needed it. The hex thing, it holds so nice, the 5C collet chuck. I've got a 2-inch angle set here, and I'm 2 degree angle on my top slide. I'm just using the top slide feeding by hand. I can't really video that because it's kind of a two-handed operation. I'm rushing it to get close. I have a few more cuts left to go, and I'll do my best to get it a nice smooth finish, and I'll bring you back for the finished product. Alright, here's the finished product. I put the form tool in here after I carefully turned this down, got the 1/4 inch diameter here, 2-inch angle, and I went about twice as slowly as I had made the previous cuts. So it came out nice and smooth. I'm going to touch this with file and sandpaper real quickly before I take it out of the lathe, and I'll bring it out and show you the finished product in just a second. Alright, I think this thing came out pretty nice. The little brake stand. I'll polish up these hex flats later on, but I'm real pleased with how that looks. 1/4x40 threaded on the bottom. A little substantial base there, and then a nice 2-degree taper blended into my form tool, and looking good. So tomorrow night I'll make the actual rod that goes to, and the crank and all that stuff. I figure I'll make all those things first, and then we can try piecing it together. I did mark where the hole is going to go over on this side. I marked that with the marker. Alright, I'll keep you posted as we go along here. Okay, not much to it, but I took an 1/8 inch piece of steel and I threaded the top end of it 1/8 of an inch, a little bit more than that actually, and I just threaded a 3/4 inch portion of the bottom of it by 540 using my tailstock die holder with a 540 die, and I was just test fitting the little nut on there so you can get a good sense that it fits good. Love the tailstock die holder. Okay, here's a pretty good overview, a lot of the parts and pieces for the controls for the brake assembly. Over here you can see the brake beam and the bars, the drop arm and the arms that hold the nut. And here's the nut, little cross nut, and the brake stand itself, a couple of the little retainer sleeves basically, the brake stand and the handle. A couple of things the book points out, and they don't make a big deal out of it, but the lower one needs to be a smaller diameter so it can pass through the 1/4x40 tapped hole for the bottom of the brake stand that goes into the buffer beam. And that's the next thing I'm going to do, is take the back buffer beam off, locate, drill, and tap my 1/4x40 hole, which is going to be roughly in this blue section here. And then once I've got that in place, I can put the buffer beam back in place and put the assembled brake stand in place, and the threaded rod will be sticking up or hanging down, if you will. It'll be in location so that I can locate the arms in the exact spot they need to be, because those are going to get silver soldered together onto that brake beam. These, I think what I'm going to do is use green Loctite to hold the handle in place, the head in place on the shaft, and the 2 retaining pins. So, because that should be more than sufficient for that purpose. So tonight, this is Wednesday night, I've been chugging along, making a few parts each night, and tonight I'm going to drill and take this apart, drill and tap that hole, and that'll enable me to start setting things in place for silver soldering and final assembly of the brake system. Okay, here I've got the handle and the upper bearing Loctited in place with green Loctite. Got them set this way. I'm just going to let it dry overnight, and we'll see how it goes in the morning. Tried to be sparing with the Loctite, but as you can see, I got a pretty good bit on there. And here's the bottom of the brake stand. I drilled and tapped 1/4x40 the hole here, and I trimmed up some of the little bracket screws so that there's a little bit more clearance and less interference in there in case I ever needed to put a nut or anything on there. But let me roll the camera down here and you can see, I think it's looking good. This is a little bit stouter of a base than the book diagram calls for, but I kind of like it, so builder's choice. So tomorrow night the plan is to Loctite the bottom bearing on, and then I can let that set, and I'll get everything in place with the shaft. And since I knurled it, I can put these arms in position very nicely, get it all set where it needs to be, and then silver solder those arms onto the shaft. Alright, here's the result of drying overnight the green Loctite. It's a nice secure fitting on all these parts, the handle and this limiting nut. It's not really a nut. Bearing, the upper bearing. So I've done a test fit here. Let me show you a side view. It's a little tough to look at the angle, but I set the nut about halfway through the threaded portion here and trying to get a handle. I have not yet silver soldered these arms in place, and I'm glad I didn't, because it's less than a 90-degree angle that puts the nut halfway down the threaded shaft. So what I'm thinking about doing right now is taking this apart. Before tonight I'll be green Loctiting the lower bushing in place very carefully so I don't gum it up. But I'm thinking about taking this out and extending this threaded portion down about another 1/4 inch to give me the proper travel that I'll need. And then over the Christmas weekend, probably not tomorrow night because it's supposed to be down in the 20-degree range, but sometime soon, maybe Saturday, silver soldering those arms in place. At least I have them in the correct orientation now, and the fit is good, and I think it'll give me good movement overall, and I'm glad I knurled that because it's made it easy to leave the arms in place like they're supposed to be. But we'll see if we can add a little bit more threaded portion onto that rod, and that should give us the kind of adjustability that we need. So I'll bring you back and show you what that looks like. And tonight I'll be, when I'm satisfied with the overall fit, I'll be green Loctiting the lower bushing into place and then silver soldering the arms, and then that should pretty much wrap up all the fabrication and fitting work for the brake system. The only thing after that will be shortening the rods and getting them to, a nice snug fit so that it doesn't take too much cranking on the handle to engage. Okay, I put the threaded rod, I took the whole thing apart, put the threaded rod back in a 5C collet inside the lathe, and I threaded it an additional probably about a 1/2 inch, just to give, there's no reason not to give yourself as much play as possible. So it's about 1 1/4 inches of a threaded portion there now. And then I put a little dab of this Super Loop synthetic grease on the column, pushed it through, and then cleaned the rod very, very well using some acetone and some of this special Loctite cleaning primer. And then I put a dab of the green Loctite in place. Before I did that, I did put a piece of painter's tape in between the little retainer, just so none of the green Loctite will seep down into the shaft. You wouldn't want that to lock up. That's also a reason I put the grease in there. So now I'll just let this thing set overnight, put the extra piece of blue tape on to hold it in place, hold the nut in place, the retainer. And tomorrow night I ought to be able to do the final fitting, get it all set, and then silver solder when time and warmth in the shop permit. Alright, here's the completed brake stand with arm and everything. The 2 little fittings are green Loctited in place. It came out really good. There's not a lot of extra slop or anything in there, and real happy with how that worked out so far. So now, time to place it in its spot, get the final measurement here, adjust any of these things so they to the right spot for them, and then get ready to silver solder. To remove this and then silver solder all this in place. Okay, the silver soldering appears to have gone well. Light there. So we'll let it solidify. It's freezing cold out here. This is the Christmas Eve day, and I was lucky to get the propane to even flow long enough to heat up those little rods there. So they'll be pretty cool pretty quick, and we'll get ready to clean them off and put everything together. Alright, here's the completed brake shaft, all connected, and just have it set in there in place before I flip it over. Let me show you catch the activity. So cranking this clockwise, Let's see, I'm loosening it now. See if you can see the system relaxing there a little bit. Now I crank it clockwise, and it's lifting or pulling down in this case those arms, and I can feel it pulling tension on these parts and applying a little brake pressure there. Pretty delicate. I'll flip it over and show you what it looks like on the other side. Okay, here's what the completed brake system looks like with the brake stand in place. And I tried it just rolling it gently like this, and then it only takes about a quarter turn to tighten up the brakes a little bit. So I'm pretty happy with how they've come out. Let me show you a vertical shot. I think we'll call it good. I think the next thing I'm going to do is examine the water pump a little bit before I start working on the cylinders, because that'll be the last detailed thing that'll be difficult to get to before I do the rest of it. I'll talk more about that in a future video. So this will probably be the last installment of the brake system for the Titch. Thanks again for being with me, everybody. Please give me a thumbs up and let me know what you think.